Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe. Very excited to welcome Marcus Gorman back to the podcast today to talk about Avanti, starring Jack Lemmon and directed by the great Billy Wilder. This was released 50 years ago in December of 1972. How are we doing, Marcus?
We're doing great. We're here to talk about one of my favorite filmmakers, Billy Wilder, in his late career.
Yes. So I started this podcast more than 2 years ago, and one of my 3 to 5 favorite filmmakers is Billy Wilder. I have not really seen much of his later films. It's kind of a weird thing in that his career starts really strong. What is his second or his third film is Double Indemnity?
Something like that, yeah.
And then he makes The Lost Weekend right after that. And then his run in the 50s is extraordinary.
And he has a great writing career before he becomes a filmmaker because he got sick of people ruining his screenplays.
He was writing screenplays in the 30s, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so he becomes a director. And then I want to say The Apartment in 1960 is like his last big, like successful critical commercial hit. Is that right?
Some Like It Hot comes out after that, doesn't it?
Some Like It Hot is 59.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should know better.
And then The Apartment's 60. And then I have affection for 1, 2, 3 from 61 because I was introduced to it at LMU in film school by Richard Hadley.
Yeah.
In a European film class. I want to say, was it European film class? And I it's kind of like this crazy zany comedy, which I admired. But after that, like, I haven't seen one that I really like. I don't know about you.
Fair. We'll totally get into it.
Yeah. But like, what's been your relationship with the films of Billy Wilder? Do you remember like the first one you saw?
Probably the first one I saw was Sunset Boulevard because when I was 9 or 10, I saw the pre-Broadway engagement of Sunset Boulevard, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical with Glenn Close, taking over for Patti LuPone, who did it in Britain, and it became a big scandal when she was not doing the American one, despite the fact that she is American. But Andrew Lloyd Webber loves a celebrity, and Glenn Close is a movie star. Patti LuPone, God bless her, is not.
So you saw the original run in like 94, 95? It
was 94. Okay, I would have been 12. Yeah, in Los Angeles at a theater in Century City that is no longer there. It's just a mall now. The big theater was inside of a mall. Now it's nothing. On one of my family's regular trips to Los Angeles, Disneyland, birthday, and see movies and a play. So I started sort of backwards, but that's how a lot of people start. Like, a lot of people start with old movies because they see them represented in musicals, I think. So I know like the adaptations way before the movies. I kind of really got into him when I was 17, 18, working at a video store, and was dating somebody who then became my wife, and she loved his work too. We have a poster of Double Indemnity in our bedroom, in fact, which is a weird thing to put in your bedroom, but it's a movie we both really like. Yeah. And then I just sort of expanded from there, completely out of order. And I really like comedies of the 30s and 40s. And he really has a nice unique perspective through his writing. As like Andrew Sarris said, it's a mixture of cynicism and romanticism, and that is very unique for him. Somebody who is he comes to America fleeing the Nazis. A lot of his family dies out there. He makes it out just in time because he sees the writing on the wall, and so there's this weird little Austro-Hungarian not meanness or cruelty, but there's a pragmatism to his work that really makes him stand out. He still believes in love. He still believes in jokes, but he is known for getting a really dark joke just slung off from his chest. And that's very cool around this time, especially during the Hays Code era.
That's absolutely true. When I think romanticism and cynicism, that's totally Sunset Boulevard in a nutshell.
Right.
Like, it's one of those rare films that has both all throughout the narrative. So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about Sunset Boulevard and some of his other classics at the end. What about his later films, like his last 5 or 6? Had you seen? So you said you owned Avanti on DVD?
Yes. I have everything of his that was released on DVD, which is not every single one of his movies. But like I have these Billy Wilder packs that I
Oh,
got
cool.
like for my birthday, and some of them are MGM, some of them are Paramount. So like Sunset Boulevard and Sabrina are packaged together, but a lot of his other movies are not, because he liked to bounce around a lot.
Right.
So after Avanti, so before Avanti, he makes Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is a movie he abandoned because it tested poorly, and he didn't have time to go back to London to do recuts and reshoots because he was going to be making Avanti.
Okay.
He gave them a 3.5-hour cut when he left, and he trusted his editor, but the editor and Paramount sliced it down to 2 hours, and so he has all but disowned this movie.
Oh, okay.
He makes Avanti, and then after that, I've seen the front page from 74, but I have not seen Fedora in 78 or Buddy Buddy in 81. But he doesn't really, like, nobody really talks about those movies. Cameron Crowe, in his book of interviews, Conversations with Wilder, which I have over here about a foot to my left.
Oh, I've always wanted to read that. I need to read that book.
Good. Yeah. I have 3 books kind of sitting here that I went through really quickly this week because I used to know a lot about him. Very quick story. So Loyola, there was a Billy Wilder class.
Right, by Hadley, right?
Yeah. And my roommate, Jeff Dolman, who is now a cameraman on Vanderpump Rules, and he loves doing that kind of stuff. He was taking that class, and a final was coming up. I didn't know this, so he texted me when I was either at work or something. He's like, "What do you love about Billy Wilder?" And I wrote out he knew he can get me started, so I just wrote out like a couple paragraphs, like, "This is amazing, this is amazing, this is what he does." And then like a week or two later, I see a printed out final with a grade on it on our coffee table, and some of it are just my words. Which I love. Like, I feel so flattered that he's like, "Oh, I have a missing hole in my final paper. I'll get my Wilder obsessed roommate to just bloviate."
Okay.
And I told him that at his wedding in Palm Springs. He's like, "Oh yeah, sorry about that." I'm like, no. I'm thinking about it 20 years later at this point.
Yeah, I can't remember why I didn't take that class. I remember I never took like a director focused history class for film at LMU. And I remember I wanted to do that one because I feel like usually when it was director focused, there'd be a director for the first half of the semester, and then there'd be a second director for the second half. But the Billy Wilder was the whole thing.
Right.
And I remember he loved Billy Wilder because I spent 4 months with Hadley in Dusseldorf, Germany. He was like the one professor who came over with us. And I remember, I mean, we took some walks together. We'd be like, touring and stuff. And he was telling me, I think that was the semester before he did it, because he was prepping for it. And he was talking about how he was like, Billy Wilder was his favorite director. And it's not enough to just do it in half a semester. He needed to show a lot more of his films.
Right.
I mean, it's early 1940s to the early 1980s. There's a lot of movies, a lot of genres that he represented, right? Like Billy Wilder is really known for, some directors like Hitchcock would kind of do the same, genre each time. Whereas, outside of a few rare examples where he went elsewhere, but Billy Wilder, if you look at his films of like the 50s, like he jumps around into different genres, and that's what made him really exciting.
Yeah, and that's the kind of filmmaker I like. Like, that's what, that was the studio system for a while. Only recently do we have like directors that really like hunker down on a certain genre, the quote unquote auteur theory, which people will argue about forever. And I actually don't give a crap because who cares? Oh, I hit my windscreen. I did it again. It's very important for somebody to bounce around.
Right.
And know all their genres, because at that point you can make 4, 5, 6 movies a year.
Yeah. And I believe 1957, I want to say Billy Wilder has 3 films. Like there's 1 year where he has like major movie stars, big movies, and there's 3 in 1 year.
That would be Witness for the Prosecution, Love in the Afternoon, and Spirit of St. Louis.
Okay. Like how are 3 of those out in the same year? I mean, I don't even think Hitchcock, outside of maybe at the very beginning of his career, like maybe there's 1 year. But like Hitchcock would regularly pump out 2 a year in the 50s, but never 3.
Right. The closest we have now in terms of the mainstream, not like, B movies or like straight to video, is like Ridley Scott and Steven Spielberg, who can pump out 2 a year if they
2.
try hard enough because they trust their people. They shoot the film, they move on. Ridley Scott does not enter the editing room, according to him. He's like, it's
I
not
didn't
my
know that.
job.
Like when he leaves the set on the last day, like he'll like look at the cuts and things, but he's not in the room working with the editor.
Right. Oh, and the other person who could kind of pull this off but doesn't anymore because he's 92 is Clint Eastwood.
Who
does 2 shots maximum, and he has a assembly cut within a week or 2.
Yeah. There were a couple years there where I'm like, wait, he has a second film coming out, like
right.
The year of Changeling with Angelina Jolie. That was like his big kind of like Oscar release. I think it came out in October of 2008. And then like July, they announced, he's also has another film, Gran Torino, coming in December. It's like, what? Okay. And he's the star of it. It's like, I mean, it's really some of these directors, because everyone you hear, they say it's 1 to 2 years of your life if you're going to direct a movie. So when they have 2 in the same year, it's like they cram 4 years into 1. It's like, it's
right.
crazy. But Billy Wilder could really pump him out. And, even towards the end, he was still making a film every few years. And Fedora is the one I'm interested in because it's William Holden. And it sounds like it's got some ties to the story of Sunset Boulevard, like an aging actress. Like, cool. That's the one that intrigues me, although I have not heard any great things about it. So maybe I'll be disappointed.
Yeah, I'll definitely watch those.
And then Buddy Buddy is the movie we all know of because it's just been so like blasted by the critics. And it's like the example Quentin Tarantino goes to as, this is why I don't want to keep making movies forever. I don't want a buddy to end my career. Doesn't he say that like every time he's asked about it?
And Tarantino makes very good films, but he's also a very mouthy individual. And like, I'm glad he has that line, like, up his sleeve. But I'm sure he can come up with other examples, especially maybe a movie that people have heard of.
Rio Lobo,
right.
Howard Hawks, which we talked about like a year and a half ago, was really rough. And and that was his last film. So we can talk about Rio Lobo too.
Yeah, and that's really tough because like there is a thing where a director just loses either their mojo or they lose the plot or their style just doesn't really fit in with what the year is anymore, which is, I think, Avanti is a really good example of. We'll get into that. But you and I grow up on these directors of the 80s and 90s who can't get movies made anymore. David Fincher is now a Netflix director. De Palma hasn't really made a theatrically released, wide release movie since Femme Fatale, really. And these are people that we really love, but they hit past a certain age. They're probably a little crotchety and a little like they don't want to be told by the studio what to do, or they see that like as we do a revival of like the studio system that almost killed cinema in the 50s and 60s, they see like every movie being made by one of 5 conglomerates that will take the movie away from them, despite the fact that they are legends and the executives don't care. And they probably think this is not worth the stress and the time. Yeah, the money's good, but I'm, in my 70s and 80s now. Who cares?
Yeah. John Carpenter is another one. I wish he had another good movie in him.
John Waters,
who I just read is making a movie. Did you read that?
Yeah, he has a deal to make to adapt his book.
So he wrote a novel in recent years. I didn't know. I've read like 3 of his memoirs, like 3 of his nonfiction. I didn't know he had a novel.
Right.
That's cool.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, but yeah, some of these directors who like Billy Wilder, didn't he live to 2003?
That sounds about right.
So
yeah,
and then wasn't he? I want to say I read something where he was thinking about doing a Holocaust film, a drama.
He wanted to make Schindler's List.
He wanted to make Schindler's List, like in the late 80s.
Like the second the book came out, he's like, I lived this. Spielberg did not.
Okay, so do you know like the history of that? Like I know Stanley Kubrick was planning a Holocaust film, and then he abandoned that after Schindler's List came out. So did Billy Wilder ever have the rights to Schindler's List, the book?
I think he had a handshake deal.
Oh, okay.
It is actually mentioned in the Cameron Crowe book, but I only went directly to the Avanti parts.
But I know I read that, like that he was at least thinking about, if not planning, a version of Schindler's List.
He was. No, he planned it for a while.
He was like for years, like he was working on. So that's kind of weird to think like in 1989, 1990, we could have had one more Billy Wilder directed movie, and it's Schindler's List. Like that would have been a different history.
Yeah. It would have probably been a slightly better movie, but not considered a classic. Like I like Schindler's List quite a bit, and I like Spielberg, but it's both his best and his worst tendencies as a storyteller.
I don't know. We could, say what it could have been, but based on Avanti and based on a little bit I saw of the Sherlock Holmes movie,
right,
and what I've heard about Buddy Buddy, like, was he at a place in his career to make a really great film of Schindler's List that would have rivaled what Spielberg did with it?
Right. I have some quotes if you have some time.
Yeah. What do you say about it?
Cameron Crowe says, I want to ask you about this. I've read that you wanted to make this your last picture, but Spielberg already had the rights. Wilder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that made him take it. I wanted to do it. We spoke about it. He was a gentleman, and we acknowledged each other's strong desires. In the end, he could not give it up. He had to do it. I would have done it differently, not necessarily better. I wanted to do it as a kind of memorial to my mother and my grandmother and my stepfather. Spielberg was always a wonderful director. When he was 12 years old, he was a wonderful director. I think there are a lot of things in E.T. that were very, very funny, especially when E.T. gets drunk. But Schindler's List, it would have been something of my heart, my most personal picture.
Interesting. And this, I wonder, like, was this around 91, 92? Was this in the late 80s? The book came out in like 84, 85, I want to say. Like, I want to say the book was like the mid 80s. Like, I don't think it was like right before the movie. I think the book was a few years before. But I just don't know. Like, okay, so he makes Buddy Buddy in 81, and then like a decade later, he's just gonna like make like his magnum opus masterpiece. I don't know.
Schindler's Ark, the book is 1982.
Okay, so early 80s.
Yeah.
So it takes a decade for it, because I've also read that Spielberg like got the project a decade before he made it, and he just wasn't ready to do it yet.
Right.
So he must have just hung on to the rights for a while. He's like, no one take it. Right.
Yeah, that's Spielberg. He always attaches himself to like 8 projects at a time. He does.
Yeah. Like growing up, whenever you would go to his IMDb page, you just see like in development, it'd be like 37 titles.
Oh my God.
And then you'd be like, I mean, I want to say the last decade, there have been 2 or 3 that looked like they were going to happen, and then they never did.
Or even producing like, I think it was called Robogeddon.
Yeah, Robocalypse. Robocalypse. I thought that was happening, and then it just like left IMDb.
Yeah, I think he put all of his effort of Robot Chaos into producing the Transformers movies.
Yeah, but it is kind of sad in that if he was looking to make Billy Wilder was looking to make Schindler's List like a decade after Buddy Buddy, it's like, well, between like 81 and 95, like, was there anything else he was developing? Was he trying to get another movie off the ground? I mean, he's a classic director. You think he could have gotten the talent to make another movie if he was still actively developing things. So I kind of wonder what happened there.
As we know, at least according to directors who hate producers, people who run studios don't really like movies, and there's always a quick turnover, and it's always people who are there to make money. We unfortunately live in a country where art is privatized, for better or for worse. Art, the history of art comes from people paying for art. However, when you don't have much government sponsorship, say like Britain or a lot of European countries, here. You hire an executive because they can make you money. And giving a Holocaust movie to an 80-year-old crotchety Austro-Hungarian man is probably not the most financially sound decision you can make.
Yeah.
And they probably don't know his history at all. They're like, whatever. Like, he's the guy who, made fun of us in his best movie ever. No.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, especially starting in the 80s, it's like it's really about profit over the art. And so Billy Wilder, when was his last hit? 20 years before his last movie. So it was probably as respected as he was, it was probably hard for him to get projects off the ground. If you're a filmmaker who's not making a lot of money off of your movies, I'm thinking about David Cronenberg. I just watched finally last night. I watched Crimes of the Future, which is just a very strange kind of slow art piece. And I'm like, this is why he can't make as many movies as he'd like.
Yes, no,
like, this is why it's been 8 years.
Yeah, I actually saw your tweet about it, and you were not a huge fan of it.
It was rough, and I was just like, you have this great cast. It's got kind of an intriguing concept, and I didn't feel like much was done with it. It was just a lot of long, laborious scenes of people talking in rooms, and there wasn't really anything about it that struck my interest. And I'm just like, come on, David.
Yeah, I get that.
I don't know.
And
it's a 1996 script, so maybe
right, makes sense. And same title as his earliest
first
film.
movie, his first film, and it's not. Was it a second feature?
It's a second feature. He has Stereo, which is a short, and then he has this car movie, Fast Company or whatever it's called.
Because when I was starting the podcast, when I was starting the film at 50, I watched some of the 1970 titles that I was interested in. And one was that 1970 film, Crimes of the Future. And it was like 68 minutes or something like really short.
Perfect.
And just like, perfect. And I was like, is this like a remake of that film? No, they're not related.
No, he liked the title enough. I was a little bored with his dramas, so I was glad he's able to go back to his nonsense, regardless of how we feel about it. Yeah. But I totally get the response. But yeah, at least his son is making cool movies right now, and I hope he gets to make a third.
Yeah. No, and I love Cronenberg's work. I thought History of Violence was my favorite film of 2005, which I think I wrote about in the Leolin. So I'm always pulling for these filmmakers who are away for 8+ years, like, hit one out of the park, make a good one. And sometimes that's not always the case. But getting back to Billy Wilder and kind of this stage of his career, the early 1970s, I mean, he's still active in the industry, but it's been a few projects since he's had a hit or a movie that was really loved. I mean, I want to say The Fortune Cookie from 1966. That's Wilder, right?
Yes.
And that's what wins Walter Matthau his Oscar.
Does it? Wow.
Isn't that his Oscar win, I want to say?
Oh, that would be so disappointing. It's not a good film, yet won one Oscar. You're right.
Yeah.
Holy crap. I didn't even think about that.
Was that the last one that was a little bit more of a hit? Was The Fortune Cookie?
Yeah.
And then is there a film between Fortune Cookie and Sherlock Holmes?
Nope.
There's not. There's a 4-year gap?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the Sherlock Holmes film, which he turns in a 3.5-hour cut. And it says, okay, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And then gets to Avanti, which, did this have a 3.5-hour cut too?
Oh, God. I felt like I watched it.
So, I mean, this is not an actively bad film. It's just so dull. Like,
it is.
There is just no life in its style, in its performances. It felt to me like a story that could have been told in 90 minutes. There was nothing here that said this has to be 2.5 hours. And it's also like trying to be both a comedy and a drama.
Exactly.
I felt
That's
like
the problem.
it needed to, and I have a quote from Wilder here I found online.
Yeah.
Where he talks about why it kind of failed. And I think that's the reason it needed to push into one genre or the other, because it opens kind of silly. Like on the plane, I had some chuckles. The first half hour, I'm laughing at a couple things. And then it just starts to become just like kind of a drama with scenes of grief and, and I'm like, okay, this is a very odd story to be trying to make funny.
Yeah.
So I struggled a bit, and the length I thought was really it's killer, because it's long and it feels long.
And because I had limited time, I watched this in like thirds, which was even worse way to do it, because I kept on losing like control of the tone, and I thought that might have been I would have liked it slightly more had I watched it straight through, but it is so long.
Yeah.
What's the quote you have?
So here's what Wilder said about his disappointment with the film. He said, maybe we went overboard with some of the comic relief because Avanti is not a comedy. If this film had worked the way we wanted it to, it would have had more of the quality of The Apartment. I always feel sorry for the disappointment of the actors and all those dear technical people who do so much. When the picture doesn't make it the way they hoped, I went much farther with forbidden themes than I had with Kiss Me Stupid. I believe that's like a 63 film with Lemmon.
That is no, it's not
64?
Lemmon.
Oh, it's not Lemmon.
No, Kiss Me Stupid is 64. No, it's Ray Walston and Kim Novak and
okay.
Who's
I'm thinking of Irma La Douce.
Irma La Douce is the weird Italian
okay.
Movie with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. Kiss Me Stupid is Kim Novak, Ray Walston taking over for Peter Sellers, and Dean Martin basically playing himself.
Okay,
we'll talk about that later. Actually,
yeah. I just like when I think like post like 1958. I think Jack Lemmon's in all of them, but that's not. He's not in all of them.
He's in 7 Wilder movies.
7. Okay, yeah, he's in a lot. Nobody cared. Wilder said audiences thought it was too long and too bland. I guess they would have liked it better if it had turned out that the father was having the affair with one of the bellboys at the hotel. Yes, so it would have, Billy.
So that is partially inside the play.
Okay.
No, it's not. No, sorry, I've gotten that wrong. So there is an added rub in the play, but the person helping him out in Italy is a woman in the play.
Oh, okay.
And we can get into the play because I have some cool research on that. But yes, I have quotes on him too. He said Avanti could have been better. So it was from a play by Samuel Taylor. I'm like, this is not a good script. Why are they following this? Oh, he wrote Sabrina Fair. And they wrote Sabrina together. Okay. And this guy also, he just co-wrote Vertigo. So
the writer of the play of Avanti.
Yeah.
Did he write this? Did he co-write with Wilder too, or is that someone else for the Avanti script?
No, that IAL Diamond, and that's another big thing. So I have a book. Yeah.
So the play. So just real quick. So the playwright of the Avanti, he wrote or co-wrote the screenplay to Vertigo.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he wrote Sabrina with him and Charles Brackett.
Okay.
And the play to Sabrina actually came out a year after the movie, oddly enough. And Wilder doesn't like it at all. It's made too many changes. Complete flop. It didn't have the same structure anymore. And through the Cameron Crowe book, I also learned, so in the Sabrina remake in the 90s, the Sidney Pollack one with Harrison Ford and Greg Kinnear and Julia Ormond, it was almost Tandy Newton.
Oh.
Which would have been really cool, but Wilder was like, I don't know if she could be able to do it, but he has weird issues with women, which is part of what this movie's about.
Interesting. Yeah. So, and I, from what I saw, the play of Avanti did not do well. It only had 21 performances.
So, are you ready for a bit of info dump?
Yeah, let's go.
So you know who William Goldman is, I'm sure, because you're you.
Nobody knows anything.
Yes. Nobody knows anything. Writer of The Princess Bride, of Misery, Marathon Man, Butch Cassidy.
Yeah.
He wrote a book in the 60s called The Season, which is a candid look at Broadway. And so he ensconced himself in the 1967-1968 Broadway season and wrote this 500-page gossipy, bitchy book about it. And it's wonderful. The language is a little outdated. I'll say that.
It's a novel?
It is nonfiction.
Oh, it's nonfiction.
He jumps into Broadway. He talks about writing, acting, financing, how plays live or die based on old women groups and social groups who will buy group sales. So he talks about every single play and musical in this one Broadway season, and it's one of the best books on American theater, in my opinion.
Okay.
So there are about 40 plays that came out. So this is in a section called sex comedies. As he says, generally revolve around vagina possession, technically true, and more closely associated with the public's mind, at least back then, with Broadway than any other kind of play except the musical. He talks, so he lists the synopsis and fake titles of 6 separate sex comedies, and he asks us to choose which 4 bombed and which 2 lasted. Those 6 are the voyeurism comedy, the mod comedy, fear of marriage comedy, success comedy, the losers comedy, and the corpse comedy. Here we have the corpse comedy.
Okay.
He's talking about the failure of The Minor Adjustment, one of the other failures. The corpse comedy has the same problem as that one. Your father dies. The next thing, you're having an affair with a girl you've known for maybe a day. Neither one of them is remotely upset about the dead parent. That's where it gets binding. In other words, if they don't care about their parents, why should we in the audience care about them? They are cold. They are selfish. To hell with them. Again, I think a comedy concerning young lovers meeting while collecting corpses is conceivable, but probably it is beyond Samuel Taylor's comic vision to write one. What I'm suggesting is that these were Marley plays, dead to begin with. They were trying to creep into the standard sex comedy genre, but something sticks when you try to be light and carefree with this kind of material. Conceivably, there might be something there, but not for light comedy. So those failures, the 4 failures lasted a total combined 49 performances and lost $500,000 in 1967 money.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So the rights to this were sold, I think, before the play went up. And I think Wilder was trapped the second they went into production or the second it was locked in, because there's just nothing here.
Yeah.
At all. And she is not fat in the play, the character, and doesn't have the last name Piggott. And we'll get into that shit.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, we got to talk about he wanted her to gain all this weight in a very short amount of time. And it's like, what possibly could be the reason for that?
I have reasons straight from the horse's mouth, or whatever the phrase is. This is also in the Cameron Crowe book.
Okay.
We looked for a girl who was very fat, very, very fat, and we couldn't find one that was attractive enough. So you could say it would be possible with that girl. Crowe asked why she had to be fat. Wilder said she had to have some defect. I did not want her to limp. Just a girl that if she wanted to, she could lose 20 pounds. Juliet Mills was kind of sinewy, but possible in the part. She ate and ate, but couldn't gain more. So as you probably read, Wilder would take her out for these wonderful dinners throughout the entire shoot in Italy. She's a good actress. The only part she had in the last 20 or 30 years. I wanted her to be real fat so that you don't feel sorry for him because he goes back to his wife. I don't know, man. I don't know.
So in 1972, that was a reason to just for the audience to be like, oh, well, okay, good. He got away from the fat girl.
But here's the main flaw of this movie, other than like the tonal inconsistencies. Does this feel like a 1972 film outside of the profanity and the nudity?
Exactly. That's what I ask myself every time I put this on. If I just were to watch this and I didn't know when it came out, like, and this happens with a lot of the horror films I've looked at this year, like where just some of them feel like they're 65. Right. I'm like, what about and this movie absolutely feels like an early 60s film. Not even late 60s to me. Like it feels, and that's where you get these older directors and they're making their final few films, and sometimes they're not really like changing with the times outside of like, oh, let me add some nudity. We get Jack Lemmon's butt in this movie, and I'm like, well, that came out of nowhere.
So I have this book I love called Close Up on Sunset Boulevard. You might have read it. It's by Sam Staggs, who also wrote All About Eve. A lot of it is talking about what happened between Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett, his former writing partner, and who he got rid of during Sunset Boulevard because Wilder wanted to make darker pictures. But Sam Staggs loves Charles Brackett and hates I.A.L. Diamond, who would become Billy Wilder's collaborator. He says, asked to name the least attractive scene in any movie, I'd say Jack Lemmon's nude scene in Avanti. His rear end looks like a flayed carcass. Played also is poor Juliet Mills, who retains her dignity throughout, even playing Pamela Piggott, so named because she's fat. But oh my God. So he hates his later career movies. So I might have gone into this not liking it to begin with because I know Sam Staggs. I'm a huge Charles Brackett fan because I thought he got the romanticism better. But Wilder wanted to make darker pictures. Sunset Boulevard, isn't Ace in the Hole next?
Ace in the Hole is 51, right?
Right.
Yeah. The Stalag 17 with Holden, I want to say is 53.
That sounds about right. But Wilder wanted to go a little darker because they wrote like romantic comedies in the 30s and 40s. And Sam Staggs is okay with this movie because what works about this movie, and you said this before, is it actually looks beautiful and sounds beautiful. Like it's a well-made movie. Like the technique is there. And Wilder is one of the last classical directors, the last Hollywood directors to go into color. He resisted color forever for a decade, which also made him stand out and also finally placed him out of time by the time you get to the 70s. Right. Sam Stagg says the flaws in the pictures of his late films, it's never technical. He uses skilled cinematographers, editors, composers. The opening of this film, however, shows the deliberate perversity of Wilder's directorial decisions. It opens with an establishing shot of Rome as Jack Lemmon's planes land. The aerial shot makes Rome look gorgeous, but only for an instant. Then the landing gears plop down into frame like a giant bird in the act of elimination. The same can be said of I.A.L. Diamond's approach to screenwriting. Just when you want to bask in the artistry of Billy Wilder, Diamond plots into the picture as co-writer and stays right on until the crappy end. He has the sensibility of a headline writer for a supermarket tabloid, but without the gaga flair. So I had that in my brain before seeing this movie that I think is an hour too long and isn't quite sure if it's a zany comedy, or as Wilder said, he wanted to make like a bittersweet movie like Brief Encounter. He wanted to make a romantic drama, but he couldn't help himself. This is the Blake Edwards problem of the 80s. Blake Edwards, who also, couldn't really make movies past like the early 90s unless they had Pink Panther name attached to them. Yeah. Started to bump up against, feminism. Erotic 80s, the Karina Longworth miniseries on You Must Remember This, is they start with talking about 10, which most people like. I think is kind of a disgusting movie because he's, making these weird sex comedies using mentality from 20, 30 years earlier. God bless him. He's a great filmmaker. And his wife is the most incredible person in the world, Julie Andrews. But there's a weird... It's the tonal inconsistencies. It's a beautiful looking movie. It would have been lovely as like this weird romantic melodrama, like A Brief Encounter or A Before Sunrise or A Before Sunset. But he couldn't help himself with like these vaudevillian yucks, which make the first 30 minutes really good, as you said.
Yeah, it's okay for a while. And then it just it's like it settles into its plot, and you're about 90 minutes into Avanti and you're like, this really isn't going anywhere. There's nothing that's keeping me engaged as to what's going to happen next.
So he goes there to pick up his dead father's body, and he's like,
and he's wearing a golf attire that he has to change with some guy on the plane.
I know, everyone's like, oh no, homosexuality happened on our plane.
I was like, oh, okay, this is how we're starting this movie, Billy.
Right. And with a language, with a Italian language joke, when the flight attendant says, please fasten your seatbelts and extinguish your seatbelts. Please fasten your cigarettes and extinguish your seatbelts. I messed it up. And there's good zingers. Like, what's she doing in the morgue? What do people usually do in the morgue? And Jack Lemmon called, who's calling? Oh, wait, I'm calling. Love, Miss Piggott is for filing clerks, not for the head of a conglomerate. And I love, he is the worst lawyer in Naples, but fortunately he and the judge, they have the same mistress. That's what you call Italian justice. These are all comedy lines in a drama.
Yeah.
And Jack Lemmon is great at comedy, and he's great at the everyman. He can't really play the lover, and Billy Wilder admits this in his interviews afterwards. That Jack Lemmon he's the wrong guy for this, because honestly, his character is a dick. He's a real dick in this movie, and I don't want to root for him. And he's cruel to Pamela the whole time through. I don't care if they get together. I don't care about him protecting his father's affair and his reputation, and wanting to impress Henry Kissinger. We're still making Henry Kissinger jokes 50 years later. And that mofo is still alive. So that was really fun. And, he makes a couple cracks about, oh, Calcutta. And they even reference carnal knowledge in this movie, which was really funny because he's talking about sex comedies now. So Billy Wilder is almost talking about how he's out of touch. And I think he found that out halfway through the movie and just kind of let it happen. And he just didn't feel like cutting it down, and he just moved on. And it's just a struggle because he is one of my favorite filmmakers, one of my favorite writers, incredibly prolific. But there's a reason we don't talk about his final few movies. I've seen The Front Page. It's not that good of an adaptation of the play, and obviously pales in comparison to His Girl Friday, the best adaptation of The Front Page, the play.
And front page is Lemmon and Matthau.
Lemmon and Matthau, and guess who plays the ingenue? The young Susan Sarandon, a year before Rocky Horror Picture Show. She's the one reason to watch it. Oh, and Austin Pendleton plays the criminal, and he's hilarious in it. Baby Austin Pendleton. But even he doesn't like it. He thinks he shouldn't have adapted it. I've seen the play on Broadway. It's fun, but even in 1974, it is a dated play.
And is the front page 74 meant to be like a zany comedy, or is that also blending drama? Is it
no, that's a zany comedy. Okay. Yeah. So imagine His Girl Friday, except Rosalind Russell is also a male character. That's the play.
Oh, okay.
Howard Hawks changed that. That's Hawks, right?
Yeah, I believe that's Hawks.
Yeah.
I watched I'm doing a year of Cary Grant, and that was one I really enjoyed. I'm watching The Bishop's Wife next. I've never seen it.
But have you seen the Preacher's Wife, the Whitney Houston remake?
Once a long time ago. I don't remember it.
Cary Grant, somebody who knew when to retire.
Yeah. He's one of the few, right? Who just he probably had another 20. Well, I think he died in 86 and he retired in 66. So he probably had another 10 years in him to make some more films. And didn't he make the choice? I wanted my screen image to remain the younger me, or he didn't want to have the old, he didn't want to play character roles,
right? And he had a child later in life. He wanted to be there for them,
right? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is wonderful. That's also why Todd Field hasn't made a movie since Little Children, and why the break between that and Tar is that he had 3 children to raise and wanted to do it right, and he intentionally chose impossible to develop projects, say like Blood Meridian, the Cormac McCarthy novel.
Yeah, and he was developing Beautiful Ruins by Jess Walter. He came to Reno a few years ago, and he was I remember he was talking about, I think he said something like, I'm not allowed to say anything yet, but we are making a film with Todd Field of Beautiful Ruins, and I want to say that was 2014, 15, right, around there.
And he just quit Devil in the White City, the miniseries. Him and Keanu Reeves both just left this week as we record this.
That would have been good.
Yes, but
have
now
you seen Tar yet?
No, not yet. The preview screening for me is next Tuesday.
Okay.
It will have come out by the time this episode is released.
Yeah.
But yes, I have to choose between that and a board meeting, so I can wait 3 days, honestly. And also, I don't love the theater they do most of Seattle screenings at. I find it very uncomfortable, but it is centrally located and literally next to the light rail, so I get it. I just wish they would have more comfortable seats. The older I get, the fewer minutes I can spend in that theater.
Yeah. But so Todd Field is one. Not to say that he retired after Little Children, but he took a break. And you have a Gene Hackman or Jack Nicholson who leave early. I would say kind of early. I feel like they both could have had another 5 to 10 years.
Right.
But Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau both worked to the end. they both, their last movie came out and then they died. It was
was that Your Fellow Americans? Is that their final film together?
My Fellow Americans is Jack Lemmon and Garner.
James Garner.
Yeah,
sorry.
Their last movie together is The Odd Couple 2 in 1998.
Right, which I saw on Airplane, the perfect way to see that movie.
I have fond memories of, because that's the last movie my paternal grandparents took me to in a theater before I was in Reno, but they came up to visit me and they took me to that. And I still remember sitting next to my grandpa, who loves this kind of silly comedy. He loves silly comedy. He laughed a lot at Odd Couple 2. So I have a fondness for that film. But then I want to say after that, they're each in one more film separately, and then they both died, I think, within a year of each other. Walter Matthau was in that terrible Diane Keaton movie Hanging Up. You ever see Hanging Up?
That's is that Nora Ephron?
It's, I think, scripted by Ephron, maybe both sisters. Isn't it both Ephron sisters?
Right.
And then Diane Keaton directs it.
That's
right.
And
I was excited about that movie because it was just the cast in it is extraordinary. It's Meg Ryan and Lisa Kudrow.
I have the answer for Jack Lemmon. He did not make a movie after Odd Couple 2. He's uncredited as the narrator of Legend of Bagger Vance.
Right. He's his voice is in that film. And didn't he do a TV movie? My Tuesdays with Maury or something?
99? with Azaria. Oh, right. Wikipedia. That's 99. Good job.
Okay.
And Chicken Soup for the Soul and Inherit the Wind, all 99.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So those were his last on-screen appearances. So his last theatrical feature film appearance was Odd Couple 2.
Yeah, I think he has a small role also, like for 1 second in Bagger Vance, but I wouldn't.
Like he might be in it too, like
Right.
just
It says like
briefly.
Old Man Graves or something.
Old
But
Man
yeah.
Graves. Yeah, and I remember when Odd Couple 2 came out, I remember they interviewed Neil Simon, and he said, I'm thinking of writing a 3 where they go to Hawaii.
Honestly,
Never happened.
If that script is out there, I would love to make that. Put other Neil Simon, put Alan Alda in that. Alan Alda and who?
Or maybe it wasn't Hawaii. Maybe I'm thinking of Beetlejuice. Maybe
yes, no, that is true. That is true.
But yeah, so in 72, I mean, Jack Lemmon's career is pretty solid at this point. He's 1 year away from a movie I've not seen called Save the Tiger.
Right,
which I've never seen. The Oscar for Best Actor.
Right.
And that's a drama, I'm assuming.
I get that mixed up with Days of Wine and Roses.
Yeah. Yeah. So his career takes off in the 50s. And then he's basically, he's a successful actor in small and large roles all the way until his death. And he could be good in dramas. I think of Glengarry Glen Ross. Yes. He's really good in that.
Yes.
I always think
he's wonderful in Glengarry Glen Ross. Wonderful in it.
I always think he should have been the Oscar nominee for that, not Pacino.
Of course, but Pacino. No, those are two very different performances. One's very loud and one is just terrified and tiny and sniveling. Oh, he's just incredible. Oh, speaking, I think Alan Alda played that on the most recent revival.
Oh, really?
With Liev Schreiber.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I've never seen Glengarry Glen Ross on the stage. That would be cool.
It's a little weird, because the movie mostly takes place in the office.
Yeah.
The first half is set at a Chinese restaurant, and the second half is in the office. I think it's a better movie than a play. And the Alec Baldwin character was written for the movie, and that's
that's not in the play.
And that's the most famous part of the movie.
Yeah, the Alec Baldwin scene.
Always be closing. Yeah. Yeah. And Mamet is fully canceled now, and that's fine by me, since also his last 20 years of plays have not been good, but that's a really good play.
Yeah, the Alec Baldwin scene was so popular and famous. Didn't they replicate it for Ben Affleck in Boiler Room in 2000?
Right. Well, it's like Boiler Room, like they specifically love that movie. Well, and I and Scorsese and Scorsese adjacent and Scorsese ripoff movies tend to have sequences where they talk about this mixing with the Tarantino postmodern culture. People like to reference movies, and so Boiler Room is very much about that, and like Wolf of Wall Street are obviously the same kind of movie. They're about the same thing, and they're both about people and dudes who grew up on this false sense of masculinity through cinema.
Yeah, but Jack Lemmon, I mean, always a popular actor, and even in the 70s, I mean, winning for Save the Tiger over Jack Nicholson in The Last Detail, over, I want to say, Al Pacino and Serpico.
Wow.
Which I think that's the one in the 70s Pacino actually went to the ceremony. Like, he's there for Serpico. And he told a story about he just wasn't feeling it. He's never really liked going to those, but he is there for his win for Son of a Woman in 93. But and then the year before, did you know that Jack Lemmon won a major award for Avanti? Did you see that?
A Golden Globe.
Yeah, major in quotation, air quote. But
it was in 1972. Sure, that's the Globes are fun.
He wins Best Actor in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy for Avanti.
Did you see against whom?
Yeah, so it's against Edward Albert in Butterflies Are Free, which we talked about this summer.
Right.
Charles Grodin in The Heartbreak Kid, which is coming up. I have not seen it yet. I'm very excited.
It's incredible.
And I'm like, that's a pretty beloved movie. I'm surprised that he beat Grodin. He also beat out his buddy Walter Matthau for Pete and Tilly, another film that's coming up in December. I've not seen that yet. And Peter O'Toole for Man of La Mancha.
Oh, right, because comedy or musical. No, Peter O'Toole, God bless him, is not a good Don Quixote.
So Peter O'Toole is nominated for the Oscar this year for The Ruling Class,
which you just talked about.
Which I just talked about, but he's nominated at the Globes for Man of La Mancha.
Right.
We never got to that movie. I wasn't sure like when that came out or.
Right. Too bad. I have lots of things to say about Man of La Mancha, especially since I was in it in high school.
Oh, okay. If we ever get around to another adaptation.
And it's my wife's second favorite musical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And yeah, based on her second favorite book.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I ever do that episode, I'll have you come on and talk about
Right.
that.
Anytime there's a freaking musical, man, do it.
Yeah. But so I looked at a couple things before I started watching this a couple nights ago, and I saw that it got 6 Golden Globe nominations, but best motion picture, musical, or comedy. I saw that Mills got a nomination for actress, Clive Revel for supporting actor.
Right, the New Zealander playing the Italian after they couldn't. He wanted Marcello Mastroianni for that role as the hotelier.
Yeah,
and Marcello turned him down.
Okay. And then I see that Lemmon wins, so I'm like, okay, this will be solid. It's probably not going to be one of the great Wilder movies, but it's going to be solid. And I'm just like, what? Who watched this movie in December of 72 and said we need to nominate this for everything?
It was the Golden Globes go off of pedigree and star effing. Yeah, it's always been their thing. They saw Wilder, they saw Lemmon. This is a high-profile movie, and I don't think it was a bomb. It just wasn't critically all that well liked.
Oh, and Wilder was also nominated for Best Director at the Globes. For 72 of all the films released in 72, 5 director slots, Wilder gets in for this.
Well, remember, I mean, obviously Coppola is nominated, but remember, Coppola's the new kid.
Right.
Wilder's the old guard.
But I mean, you have Bob Fosse for Cabaret.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we've talked about this before. Outside of Cabaret and The Godfather, throughout 72, there's not a whole lot of other front runners or like big, like critical darlings. Here and there, you get like a Deliverance or The Emigrants. But like we talked about Sounder a few weeks ago, and that movie got into Best Picture at the Oscars. And I mean, I feel like with a different voting body, like Sounder might not have done as well as it ultimately did. It wasn't like one of the big super hits of the year. So 72 has kind of its quirks.
Yeah, I'm going through right now the nominees. I forgot that they split. So Poseidon Adventure was nominated for Best Drama that year. Cool, great movie.
Haven't seen it.
You're about to, right?
It's coming.
It's so good. I think it's the Great Disaster.
I've seen clips from it. I've like vaguely seen like maybe 10 minutes of it.
Right. It was Coppola, John Boorman for Deliverance, Bob Fosse, Billy Wilder, and Hitchcock for Frenzy.
I would have liked Hitchcock to have made the final 5 at the Oscars for Frenzy.
But people hated that movie.
That's a movie that we talked about in June, and there's definitely flaws, and I have issues with some of it, but he's also, as opposed to Wilder and Avanti, who I feel like is just making this kind of pedestrian movie without much style or directorial stamps of any kind. Like Hitchcock is being very playful in Frenzy and doing new things that he never got a chance to do.
Oh yeah,
prior to 68. I like that movie exists. It's kind of an interesting, extra film on his resume that's worth a look.
And these are both respectively, their first R-rated films, Wilder and Hitchcock. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hitchcock only made one R-rated movie.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me wrong. I love Frenzy. I saw that at the UC Theater when I was 17, when they were celebrating Hitchcock's centennial, and they showed 2 of his movies a day for a month.
Oh, cool. That would be awesome.
Frenzy was paired with Rope.
Oh, that'd be a fun
very,
night.
Very fun day. Lots of murder, lots of strangulations, good times.
I didn't even realize, so you said that Avanti's rated R. Well, I never even realized that.
It's his first movie with profanity and nudity.
Yeah, I mean, the nudity is very brief, though. Are there F-bombs in the movie?
No, but there is profanity.
Okay. I didn't get a sense watching it that this was an R-rated film.
Right. Yeah, it was the nudity and probably some of the subject matter, because it's only 4 years after the dissolution of the Motion Picture Production Code, and they're still not sure what ratings are, and there's no PG-13 at this point.
Yeah, it's really weird. When you think of like Jaws being PG
or Barbarella being PG, which is lots of nudity.
Like I wanted to show a clip of Jaws to my young students the other day, and I'm like, what's like a clip I can actually show? And it's rated PG. It's pretty intense for PG.
I saw that because they released it in IMAX a couple months ago. Yeah. I finally saw it in theaters on IMAX. Most I've ever been scared by that movie.
Did it look good on IMAX?
It looked well because he restored it. He remastered that and ET, and they both came out within like 3 weeks of each other.
Oh, okay.
It looked
like,
beautiful.
that's an old movie to be on IMAX.
Right, no, for both of them, he did an IMAX and a 3D, not one in the same. You see one or the other, and I would rather see Jaws on an IMAX screen at the theater 8 minutes from my house. And when the second attack, when in the cove, when the child gets it,
looked really good on IMAX.
It's the first time I've screamed when they showed Bruce.
Oh, okay.
Just shrieked because it's really jarring. It's not like the Fin. It's everybody's running away from the beach. Turns out Jaws is in the cove, and then you see the kids getting into the boat, and then a shot from above, just the giant shark puppet going, ah, very scary.
So just in between West Side Story and The Fabelmans, he's also got these projects. He's always working,
Well, he does wonderful pre-production, as you probably know. He does all the shots because he grew up with little army men and made short films that way. He still uses tiny models and a tiny camera and builds tiny sets and storyboards and like animatics that way. And he that's why his CG looks so good, is because he tells them up front exactly what he wants, and he does not waver from it. So they have months to do it. It's not an unfinished film. It's not like Cats, where Tom Hooper kept on changing his mind at the last second, and the movie remains unfinished as a result. Spielberg actually knows what everything needs to look like months or years ahead of time, and he's able to walk away from it when it's done, which is why he's able to make, say, 2 movies a year. While he was shooting Schindler's List, he was overlooking the CG and work on Jurassic Park via early internet.
Yeah, he talked about how he'd like work a long day on the set of Schindler's List, and he'd be in a certain state of mind, and then he'd have to like look at visual effects for Jurassic Park, and it was very strange. He said to go back to that former project, he had like already completely moved on, I want to say.
And the thing about going back to Avanti, it is a destination movie. It is a travelogue movie, which we loved basically up until the 70s. But that's if you want like women over 30 to see your movie back then, at least this was the thinking, you show them a pretty travelogue. These are movies all over Turner Classic Movies, and I can see why Golden Globes would like this, because they're an international voting body. And it looks gorgeous. He had a great he had a great production designer, Ferdinando Scarfiotti, who in the Cameron Crowe book, he's asked about him. The first thing he says now is he's now dead of AIDS. Like, thanks, Billy.
Oh, okay.
But he says he was not a designer. He found locations and offered them as they were. He couldn't build a goddamn thing. He always had 2 little assistants. Little, they were aged men. You wanted a hotel, but he had to find it first. But then how do you find it, and where do you put the lights? And the third day, they're going to throw you out of the hotel. That's what making this movie was like. And he loved working with his DP, Luigi Cuveyer, who only did this one picture for Wilder. Good quality, because that was in the air. He could not help but to photograph it and make it look real, because usually you do something with a set and you would like to make it real, but they already made it real for 300 or 400 years. That's wonderful. So at the very least, this is the Adam Sandler and Friends situation, where they make a movie because they want to go on vacation. I feel like Billy Wilder wanted to hang out in Italy, in the Bay of Naples, on the exact island where it's set. And they had lovely, rich meals. I feel like Billy Wilder runs like a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. set. As you do if you came of age as a filmmaker in the era that he did, and treating it like a job.
Right.
So,
but I feel like, so that's why the movie's as long as it is, because they needed to spend more time in the country.
And one final thing, you probably saw this in the trivia too. The shot of the landing gears opening is stock footage that Cameron Crowe also uses in Jerry Maguire.
I did not see that.
That was
crazy.
That's a pure coincidence, despite the fact that Wilder is Cameron Crowe's favorite filmmaker, and he actually loves this movie. He says it's his late career best, and it's like this melancholy thing. I didn't see melancholy. I saw an asshole and a very nice woman, barely worried about. Like, there's a whole zany screwball comedy thing happening. The corpses disappear. The brothers who own the vineyard want a couple million lira, which is like $35,000 in today's money, and that gets like brushed aside. Then there's like the weird murder plot with the bellhop who wants to, the bellhop is blackmailing him because he wants a visa to America. and he has a Sicilian maid girlfriend who the joke is she has a mustache. Ha 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 ha. Jesus Christ. I
Oh my
couldn't
God.
believe it. I couldn't believe it. I looked up the actress, beautiful woman. They made her look like that for a stupid Sicilian joke. And
Yeah.
as a my wife who is Sicilian did not watch this, but she will one day. She'll probably think it's pretty funny, but
Mm.
also that is not a 1972 joke.
Yeah.
That's a Catskills blue humor joke in like the late 50s.
But according to Wilder, he was not trying to make a comedy, but he does something like that.
With like 20 years later, he probably says that because like this is the one
Like
I wanted
it's
to
been a
make.
while.
But he doesn't like talking about this movie. He doesn't like this movie very much. But maybe at the time he thought that's what I was doing, and he just couldn't help himself with the zingers. Go one way or the other.
It's like it's like
so
Faye
weird.
Dunaway, Mommy Dearest. Don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right, and that's a little well. And Faye is a wild person, I'll say. Great actress. Like I definitely don't want to be like misogynist saying, oh, she's crazy. But apparently, like she's just a pain in the ass to work with and is very mean. And
Yeah.
I won't put up with that for men, women, or
Mm.
anybody on any part of the spectrum.
Yeah. The Betty Davis stories on YouTube are pretty hilarious.
Right. And the thing is, I love Betty Davis because I think her and Crawford both have their ire sort of upped a little bit. Like it's more legend than fact.
Have you seen that video of Betty Davis on, was it Carson? And
Yeah.
she's like, Faye Dunaway is the worst actress I've ever worked with. And it's like, and she's like, anyone who has worked with her, who has sat in this chair would tell you the same thing.
Right.
And she's like, what is she, a year away from dying? She's just like, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna say my truth.
She never really cared, which is why I love her.
But yeah, so back to Avanti. I mean, Jack Lemmon, I think, is miscast. I don't know. I think it was just because they had a close relationship and he thought he might be good in this role. I think you're right. He's not a likable guy. When we see Jack Lemmon in a movie, especially the way this one opens, you get a sense that it is going to be a comedy, and it doesn't really push into that after the first half hour. I guess Wilder showed Lemmon some of the script, and so he agreed to play Wendell. And then Wilder was a fan of Juliet Mills from a sitcom called Nanny and the Professor. He didn't like the series, but he enjoyed watching her.
Yeah,
that's what
fine.
it says.
Well, I completely sympathize with that kind of mentality. As somebody who watches network television sitcoms, that's true a lot of the time.
Right. When you just watch something that's mediocre, but you like one thing about it, like a person in it or something, like you're like, well, I'll just keep watching for him or her.
Yeah. Constance Wu in Fresh Off the Boat, especially in the later seasons.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So he contacted her and personally offered her the role of Pamela. I loved Billy Wilder, she said, just calling me and asking me to be in his film. No lawyer, no agent, just his voice, not asking for an audition or a screen test. So that's kind of neat. I mean, I can't imagine a lot of actors get that call if you're not like one of the top A-listers, like to just be called. I remember like Jamie Lee Curtis talks about all the time that she did not pursue True Lies. James Cameron just called her one day and said, I want you to play this role. And had to convince Schwarzenegger. Like Schwarzenegger was like, not Jamie Lee Curtis. No, he's not right.
Did he want somebody he could sort of overtake?
Maybe. Like I remember reading a story once that Schwarzenegger was a no to Jamie Lee Curtis. He's like, no way. And Cameron said, do you trust me? And Schwarzenegger said, yes. He said, then it's Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
And Schwarzenegger said, okay.
What would the movie be without Jamie Lee Curtis?
I'm like, that movie has its ups and downs. Like Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie is on another level, and I cannot imagine it without her.
Right. The female leads in Schwarzenegger movies, if there are female leads, tend to sort of fade into the background. And I think he sort of enjoyed that. The one time it didn't happen.
And Linda Hamilton, of course, in T2 also.
Of course. Right. That's do you trust me? But of course, that was, Schwarzenegger couldn't tell him, don't cast your wife.
Well, were they married? I don't think they were married in 91. I think they got married later.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like mid-90s. But maybe they were dating at the time. I'm not sure, but
who knows?
So Juliet Mills, and it's no shade on the actress. She didn't do much for me in this movie. Like there wasn't a lot to her character. I typically blame the script over the person because I always feel like anybody, if they get the right role, they can really hit it out of the park. And I just think the screenplay kind of lets her down here, and there is no chemistry between her and Lemmon.
No.
It's kind of awkward. It's like not even slightly okay, like it doesn't work, and you're expected to just follow this relationship for 2+ hours. And I'm like, this movie's screenplay was already bad, but then you're putting in the wrong people. That's a mix that's not going to work, you know.
Right. And Wilder does have some issues writing women. Another book I have is Billy Wilder in Hollywood, and the author basically says actually his final 4 movies are him making up for him miswriting women earlier in his career. And like, so he actually likes Pamela as a character because it's at least an attempt to do something a little different. It's an evolution, more free of female stereotypes. This is true. Pamela is not a stereotypical character. The question is she handled well at all outside of that concept? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I feel like the reviews for this movie were kind of so-so. There weren't a lot of raves. Roger Ebert gives it kind of like a kind 2.5-star review.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's pleasant, it's civilized. Also, it's too long by half an hour. It suffers from the problem that the audience has everything figured out several minutes before Lemmon does. But still, the movie has a certain charm. Maybe he's just referring to like the location of the movie. Because I love spending time in Italy. I'm like, sign me up. But I feel like we don't do a lot with the setting, do we?
No.
I mean, I feel like we don't really go outside that much.
Also, rest in peace, Roger Ebert, but he loved breasts on film.
He did like the breasts, absolutely.
Yes, so he probably was like, hell yeah. Like the scene where they're on the rock and the Italian men on the boat turn the boat around because they see nudity. Mm-hmm. Like Ebert's on that boat.
Ebert's on that boat. Yes, this has come up. I feel like even on the televised show, there were a couple instances where Siskel was like, you just like this movie for her or something, like where he's like, let's do away with the criticisms and everything. But so the reason you like this movie, Raj, was because you like her. And he'll like go, well, what's wrong with that?
Right.
I think I'm thinking of the Tomb Raider 2 review with Richard Roper.
Oh, The Cradle of Life.
Where Roper's like, he's like, I think you just like this movie because you like Angelina Jolie, and Ebert's like, well, what's wrong with that?
Right. What's the quote? Is like the history of film is men photographing women.
Exactly.
That is.
But I mean, I feel like, I mean, he's a very, respected writer. I don't think he was giving positive reviews to movies just because a woman bared her breasts, but I don't think it hurt for Ebert.
But it's a visual medium. If you see someone you like, you stand by it.
Yeah. He gave Showgirls 2.5 stars. He almost gave it a thumbs up.
Yeah, no, I remember. So also that year he gave Sense and Sensibility 2.5 stars. And somebody wrote in and said, "Are you saying that these are equal?" He's like, "No, I think Showgirls is actually better." Oh. He's like, "This is a better version of the movie it's trying to be than the movie that Sense and Sensibility is trying to be," which is always his rubric. First of all, what is a movie trying to do, and does it achieve that?
And he would always get really upset when people really zoned in on the star rating he gave a movie.
He hated doing that.
He's like, no, just read the piece and you'll know why I feel this way. It's not, if 2 movies get 2.5 stars, doesn't mean they're at the same level. Sometimes, a certain filmmaker is making this movie who's, done amazing work before and they let me down this time. So that's kind of why it's 2.5. But of course, it's better than this other junkie movie I gave 2.5. I mean, that would happen. Right. But so he was kind of so on Avanti, and then I didn't see like the other 2 I looked at, they were like kind to it. I mean, I feel like outside of maybe Cameron Crowe, I don't think there were a lot of rave reviews.
No. But apparently this is the best of his final 4 films.
Oh God. Okay.
I'll watch Fedora and Buddy Buddy at some point.
Buddy Buddy is the one. I did something fun I like to do, just like it relaxes me, is watch old Siskel and Ebert reviews, and there's a website that has all of them now. Mm-hmm. And I watched the episode where they reviewed Buddy Buddy like a month ago, and they just tore it apart. Like I think Ebert says, you watch this movie, there is not one laugh, there's nothing, and it's a zany comedy,
right?
And you don't laugh, like there's nothing. And Siskel's like nodding, agreeing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, at best, it'll be terrible, not god awful. Right. I feel like but Fedora, I have hope. Fedora, come on, Billy. Don't let me down. I love William Holden. And I mean, when I was watching Avanti, I'm just asking myself, I'm like, Sunset Boulevard is my all-time favorite film. I have seen it 30 times, maybe more. And for me, there's not one frame that doesn't work. Everything about Sunset Boulevard, I adore in every way. And I'm like, how can you as a filmmaker make a movie that good and make a movie like Avanti? Like, how can it go that lopsided in just a direction of like, none of this is really working on a emotional level, narrative level. It doesn't really keep your interest. And why is it 2.5 hours long?
Right.
There's no reason.
And I know he wanted Walter Matthau to play the ambassador at the end. And couldn't get him, which would have made it slightly better.
Yeah. But
that's still a 30-minute epilogue.
Yeah. I think this movie needed a rewrite from page one. I think it needed a different approach to the material. Well,
also, he wasn't going to make this with Diamond. He tried 3 other collaborators trying to make this work. And that was Julie Epstein, who wrote Casablanca.
Okay.
Norman Krasna, who wrote Romance in Manhattan, this lovely film called 2 Tickets to Broadway, Sunday in New York, and White Christmas, that really weird holiday staple that everybody strangely loves. I like it, but it's a weird freaking movie and oddly complicated for a Christmas musical. And then he tried to adapt it with Luciano Vicinozzi, who wrote Divorce Italian Style, and none of them worked out. And he's like, okay, Diamond, come back in. We're going to do our best. And it just seems like sometimes you just make the thing you have in front of you and you end up with something like this. You can't really get away with that much today because movies are either micro budget or very expensive. The mid-budget comedy is mostly gone.
Yeah.
So this movie would never happen now.
You don't see a Avanti remake in 2022?
I mean, I could make a meal out of this concept of people with corpses in Italy doing their best and trying to hide that. Like, that's a swinging doors comedy. I can easily do that on stage and have it be interesting. Or you make the fun travelogue version and you just have that stuff in the background and make it the before sunrise brief encounter drama you want. You can't do both unless you are that skilled of a writer. Zany comedy is one of the hardest things to materialize and to tune into and to calibrate. Calibrate is the right word. He did not calibrate this correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core concept of a person who's kind of estranged from their father. The main character lives in the United States. Father lives in Italy. Father dies in Italy. And the main character goes there to, to do what he needs to do for his deceased father, and then meets a woman while over there. I think that little nugget, there's like a possibility of a strong film.
Oh, hell yeah.
If like Richard Linklater made that movie, like with a great cast, and it was 92 minutes and it was just much more emotionally fulfilling. Like, I feel like that could be a great movie.
Totally.
So it's possible, but in terms of like how this movie plays out, that would not work for a remake.
No, you need a younger filmmaker who really wants to get the emotion across and isn't afraid to make the rest of the film a little less funny as a result. Yeah, because you want to have the feelings of this movie, and they're just not there.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I really wanted to come on here today. I didn't want to, talk negative about Billy Wilder. He's one of my favorites. And so, as we wrap up the conversation, we're going to talk about his best work. And it was like hard. Like, I have 2 films in my runners up that I think are masterpieces, and they're in my runners up. So we'll talk about that. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about Avanti before we move to the final 2 segments?
We can move on to the final 2 segments.
Let's do the final 2 segments. Okay, so 2.5 hour Avanti is over and you're worn out. I have to say my partner walked in as I was starting Avanti, and he was like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's Jack Lemmon comedy." He and then he left to run a couple errands. He comes back 2 hours later, walks in. He's like, "You're still watching that movie?"
Yeah.
I said, "I think it's almost over." I'm like curled up on the couch, just like, it's almost done, But yeah, so these 2.5 hours are done. what do we recommend we put on right after? Something modern.
Right. More modern. I was thinking through like Italian movies, but couldn't find like major ones that people would have heard of. And um, I thought let's focus on corpse comedy.
Okay.
Let's focus on corpse comedy, which means I'm recommending 2016's Swiss Army Man
Oh,
by Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, the Daniels, who made Everything Everywhere All at Once. That is Paul Dano on a deserted island. He finds a corpse played by Daniel Radcliffe, and he starts to imagine that this corpse is like he can actually do things and speak with him and like make weird montages and machine gun sounds with him. That is the way to make a corpse comedy if it's an actual comedy, and also have strong feelings at the end, because that movie gets extremely emotional by the end. But most of it is Paul Dano and zombie Harry Potter just being weird on the island, having fun and having conversations about love and sex and brotherhood and just being weirdos.
Yeah, that was a movie I wanted to love, and I admired it more than I liked it. But I always love it when a filmmaker just swings big and just goes for it. And I've been really excited seeing what Daniel Radcliffe has been up to lately. He's just like, I've got all the money I need in the world, and I'm just going to make these quirky, little films. And I'm excited to see his Weird Al Yankovic movie. And then, that's like a perfect like double feature, because it is kind of has some of the same plot elements, but in a completely different narrative way. Yeah.
Well, when you asked this question for double feature, you're like a movie from like the last like 10 years,
20, yeah,
10, 20 years. Otherwise, I would have said Weekend at Bernie's, or Weekend at Bernie's 2, especially the location one in Jamaica.
It's not, if there's like a perfect double feature movie and it's like 1987, I say go for it. It's okay. Right. I just like, part of the podcast's idea, like it's like, okay, looking at films from today versus 50 years ago, and like what could be, because I'm always intrigued by like watching a film from 72 and then something more modern that touches on some of the same ideas and themes.
Yeah,
like how does it look different now and how is it similar? I always think it's an interesting question. So that's it. So you went with the corpse direction. I went with like an adult comedy / drama in Europe. And I went with a movie that I thought was really lovely, and it was Paris Can Wait, directed by Eleanor Coppola and starring Diane Lane.
I have not seen that. Paris
Alec
Can
Baldwin. Wait. Yeah, it kind of went under the radar. It opened like the same week as the Beguiled remake by her daughter, which I thought was really cool. So Sofia Coppola comes out in the summer of 2017 with the Beguiled, and then like the same week, same month at least, Eleanor Coppola spent years writing this screenplay.
Right.
And at 80 years old, she directed her feature film debut for a narrative. I mean, she'd worked on documentaries before. Like her first like narrative feature film. And it's Paris Can Wait. And it's this quiet, lovely comedy, drama, romance film. It's about a woman who's in Europe. She's an American in Europe, and she's there to support her husband. I'm trying to remember if he's making a film or if he's premiering his film. Her husband's a filmmaker played by Alec Baldwin.
Right.
And he has like maybe a press tour or something. And she decides she's going to step away for a few days and just see some of the countryside. And she meets another man while she's by herself.
Well, that's weird that her daughter would make Lost in Translation, which is the same plot.
Maybe Eleanor watched Lost in Translation and said, this is good, but what if it was with Diane Lane?
Right.
No, that's interesting you say that. I never put the two together as like the same movie. Maybe in just me explaining it sounds like the same, but no, it's a much more kind of adult, kind of like a woman. She's not sure if this is the man, Alec Baldwin, she wants to be with for the rest of her life. And
right.
And I just thought it was like a solid movie that is mostly a drama, but has some comedic elements. And I thought it blended that together a little bit better than Avanti did. Also, before I forget, I'm also doing a year of Vincent Minnelli, which has been fun. And for the first time, I watched it over 2 days. I watched Designing Women.
Yeah.
With Gregory Peck and Lauren Bacall. Not a great movie, but I watched Avanti, and then the next movie I watched was Designing Women. And I'm like, okay, this is 1957. It's a little bit different era. But Designing Women, I'm watching this movie and I'm like, this is a movie that's got style. It moves fast. It's got a lot of personality. The actors are excited to be their characters. And I'm like, this is what's lacking in Avanti. Like, I'm not seeing that excitement from anybody. Technical, in front of the camera. It just feels just kind of like this passable, like serviceable movie. And then you put on Designing Women, and even though the plot's kind of silly and doesn't all work, like, I just got a sense that everybody involved with this production was excited to be there and wanted to bring their all. And I adored watching Gregory Peck in this like romantic comedy lead role, because I always think of him as very serious, and like it was fun to see him play zany. And I mean, there's a scene in the movie where a dog is like trying to grab his shoe and he's like fighting the dog. And I'm like, it's Gregory Peck. And Lauren Bacall, just stunningly gorgeous in the film. And so I wanted to mention that movie too. And, I'm always looking at films, not just new stuff, but old stuff too, and directors and actors. And I just feel like Avanti needed to go one way or the other. And that middle ground just didn't work. Whereas Designing Women is clearly trying to go more the comedic route. I thought that was more successful. But let's go now to Billy Wilder. So if you had to take 3 movies, Marcus, to a desert island, directed by Billy Wilder, go with you?
I'm actually not going to do the desert island thing. So maybe you'd like to start with the 3, because I'm going to be a little atypical.
You're going to be atypical.
Yes.
Okay. So if I had to take 3, they'd be, of course, Sunset Boulevard, my favorite film. My second favorite, if I had to pick one, is Some Like It Hot, which I watched again last summer. There was a Blu-ray Criterion at the library, and I was like, I gotta watch this, and it looked gorgeous and fantastic. And then I went to San Diego a few weeks after I watched it, and went to like the hotel in San Diego where they shot Some Like It Hot, and I was just like a giddy, like like this is great. You walk in and they have like a room of all sorts of like Some Like It Hot books, and really cool. And then so number 3 is between Double Indemnity, The Apartment, and The Lost Weekend. And I would go with Double Indemnity.
Okay, I'm like, push Lost Weekend out of that. Absolutely.
Well, really? Oh, I've seen Lost Weekend twice. I think it's really good.
Oh no, it's really good. He is not a huge fan, and it doesn't really feel like one of his movies. It did win Best Picture, obviously. But,
okay.
That's the darkness without the humor. No, I'm just saying it doesn't belong in the top 3. So I'm glad you pushed it out.
So I went with Double Indemnity, mostly because I like that trio. It's like they're slightly different in genre.
Yeah.
Like Double Indemnity's more like pretty serious film noir. Some Like It Hot, more of like a slapstick, zany comedy. And then Sunset Boulevard, which blends comedy with drama, but is more of a drama and more about Hollywood, and feels to me a lot different than Double Indemnity does. So I think that those would be 3 good ones to take.
And I consider all 3 of those to be comedies.
Yes. I mean, yes, that's what makes, if Sunset Boulevard was purely dramatic, it'd be too much. Like we would laugh at it if there wasn't like a little bit of winking at the camera. So I think that's what makes that movie so great, is that there is a little bit of that dark humor element, and it is very funny. Like William Holden's voiceover, I watched it again. When did I watch? Oh, I was on a podcast recently called My Favorite Movie Is. I was the guest, and so we talked about Sunset Boulevard. So I watched it again, and there were like 3 parts that like William Holden says like made me laugh out loud, and I'm like, how many times have I seen this movie? And it's still
so funny.
Like his what he says back to her when she's talking about the horoscope, and she's like, today's the day to deliver the script to DeMille. I've read the horoscope, and or like she talks about the horoscope. She's like, well, she read the script. All these little zingers that if you're not paying attention, it's like goes over your head, like it's 2 seconds.
Right.
But if you're really listening, there's a lot of really funny jokes in Sunset Boulevard.
The musical underlines that joke. Because the musical's not really that funny. It's one of my favorite musicals, but like seeing the movie afterwards and realizing how funny it was very eye-opening. And Wilder saw the play, and he likes the play, but he's like, why is her house so ornate? It should be like gothic and dark and dank. It should not be covered in gold. Yeah.
All right. So tell me your favorites here.
So no, I have favorites, obviously, but like, it's easy to say like Sunset Boulevard or, or Some Like It Hot or The Apartment, or even like The Major and the Minor or Double Indemnity or Ace in the Hole. all these. I went with ones that we don't talk about as much. One you've already mentioned, which is 1, 2, 3, the James Cagney communist comedy, which is just uproarious. And it's one of his great comedic performances because he never really liked being the noir guy. He wanted to be a song and dance man and a comedy man. 1, 2, 3 is absolutely hilarious. It is held up better than most Billy Wilder movies, especially ones like post-major era.
I wrote a paper about it for Hadley. It's around here somewhere.
Pair that with Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
Great double bill. Another one we just brought up was Kiss Me Stupid, which is a weird little Vegas trailer sex comedy. Dean Martin just basically plays himself, and he's a lech, and Ray Walston is married to this kind of loose woman, and he's trying to stop this weird hall pass affair from happening. And it's I have some colleagues who think it's a misogynist movie. I think it's making fun of the men more than the women, and Kim Novak is strong enough to play the character with strength and aplomb. And Peter Sellers was in the movie, and they did shoot with him, and I think he had a heart attack. So Ray Walston took over, and honestly is a little better because Peter Sellers is a great actor, but he is not an emotional actor, and that movie rides on its emotion, and it's mixed with comedy way better. And for the last one, I chose a movie that Billy Wilder wrote, but did not direct, that I love, that he wrote it with Charles Brackett, and I saw in a class at USC where my sister went, and they were showing this movie. I'm like, it's a Wilder movie. I haven't seen it. It's not on video. It's called Midnight. With Claudette Colbert and Don Amici, and John Barrymore and Mary Astor. Holy crap! And Hedda Hopper.
Wow. What is this, like late 30s?
1939. It's called Midnight. Reese Witherspoon almost remade it about a decade ago, and that didn't happen. But it's about a chorus girl who's in Paris, and a millionaire hires her to break up his wife's affair. But she falls in love, and she's being pursued by the cab driver, the funny cab driver, who's Don Amici. And of the movies that he wrote and didn't direct that are not called Binochka, it's probably his funniest script. And it's also deeply romantic. Claudette Colbert, maybe her best performance, which is saying something because she's wonderful. A gorgeous version of what a romantic comedy can look like, being zany and emotional and deeply romantic. Great movie. And Ninochka, if you haven't seen Ernst Lubitsch's Ninochka, extremely hilarious, funny movie. And Silk Stockings, the musical remake with Sid Charisse and Fred Astaire and Jules Munchin, is also great.
Wait, Wilder wrote Ninochka?
Wilder wrote Ninochka.
I didn't know that. That's right. Blowing my mind. I didn't know.
It's in the Close Up on Sunset Boulevard book, because talk about the test screenings for that, and one person wrote down, this movie was so funny I peed in my girlfriend's hand. But please, if you can find Midnight from 1939, it's an undiscovered gem. I'm sure it was huge at the time, but you hadn't even heard of it, and you're you.
Yes. And I just made a YouTube video about Claudette Colbert winning the Oscar for It Happened One Night, and I read a lot about her career in the 30s, and I did not look at Midnight. Yeah, so I have to check that out.
Oh, it's wonderful. So that's my recommendation. Because people know Billy Wilder, they know his big movies. You don't need me to tell you about it in the year 2022.
Yeah. And as you said, I mean, The Apartment's another big one. 1, 2, 3 I have on here is 2. I would say the other two worth mentioning that maybe not everyone has seen. I think Ace in the Hole with Kirk Douglas is really great. And that's the film he makes right after Sunset Boulevard. I was very excited to put it on because I'm like, this is the one he followed it up with. So yeah, I mean, he was just firing on all cylinders in Sunset Boulevard. So clearly this one should be pretty solid. And it's really great. And I really love Witness for the Prosecution. Have you seen that? Thank you. That was almost my recommendation until I went with my other idea of ones that people haven't heard of. I saw that for the first time this year. Yeah, and it's a fun courtroom drama. Great cast. It's really, the last 20 minutes of that movie are the most insane things you'll see in a courtroom movie. I couldn't believe it, and it probably kills on stage. Because it's a play first. Yeah, and if you can tell it was a play, but that one really works well on film, and it's a terrific ensemble cast. And that's we're looking. That's Charles Laughton and Tyrone Power. Yeah, Tyrone Powell.
Powell.
And Charles Laughton I think Charles Laughton's kind of the lead of the film. Like he's in a
Yeah.
lot of it. And it's not all in the courtroom. There's other, like we go outside that world a little bit, but it's mostly a courtroom film, but it's really riveting. And it's one of those whodunits where you're like, towards the end, you're like, who did it? Like you're trying to guess. And then the reveal is really surprising. And it's a great watch.
Oh, you are not able to guess what the last 20 minutes are if you don't know it. It's out of control. I watched it like the same week I watched Judgment at Nuremberg, which has like a similar setting, but the exact opposite tone. And that was a fun mismatch.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tyrone Power is great in it. And Charles Laughton is truly hilarious.
Yeah. And so he makes that film, and then he just very soon thereafter makes Some Like It Hot. I mean, the guy could just kind of jump around in genres, especially in the 50s. And did you see Blonde? There's a scene with Wilder and Blonde.
Yeah. Oh, I saw that in theaters. There's a theater here that plays Netflix movies.
Okay.
It's the last Landmark Theater in Washington.
De Armas does that moment from Some Like It Hot, and Wilder, like an actor playing Wilder, comes up to her, and it's like the camera's all shaky and handheld. And that was like, I'm like, I don't think this is how it went down, but this is kind of great anyway to watch the scene.
Right. He's probably referred to as a director. Okay, so obviously we're not going to get into Blonde talk, but people need to remember that the Joyce Carol Oates book is a work of fiction.
Yeah.
It's intentionally a work of fiction. She told everybody it was a work of fiction. And Andrew Dominic had said, this movie is not a biopic. And now people are saying, this isn't Marilyn. Yeah, no shit. That's the whole point. If you want a biopic of Marilyn, just watch a documentary. There's millions of them. Have fun.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was odd about that was that we get a lot of recreations of her films, and they get the years right. So that element I thought was weird, because that is all real, but then all of the narrative, the emotion around a lot of these experiences, you could kind of tell that they're embellishing. And I think it's okay to do that sometimes. It doesn't happen. If you're making a story about a real person, doesn't always have to be exactly true for it to be a good movie. And
most biopics make up a lot of crap anyway. At least this one comes out of their way and says it. I understand the knock. It's like, oh no, she was a vibrant person, very funny, and this is just about all of her suffering. One critic compared to Last Temptation of Christ, which I think is the most direct comparison in terms of tone.
Right.
I understand if you don't want to see a woman suffer for 2.5 hours, and especially when it's made by a man, that movie would look differently if it was made by a woman. However, I think it's a very strong movie that knows exactly what it is and is a work of fiction about the suffering that we all do for our art. It does just happen to center on a woman being tortured for 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, that was another movie I admired and I liked it. It's like Avanti, too long. It's 3 hours long. It's like,
it does not. The third act is super extended. We know what happens to Marilyn, even in this fictional version of her life.
But I just wanted to mention that real quick, since we do see an actor playing Billy Wilder in the movie. And real quick before we wrap up, what are the books called that you have about Billy Wilder? You have the Cameron Crowe book, Conversations with
Wilder, which was a birthday present when I was 17. My dad got it for me.
And that's an entire book of interviews.
Yes. They sat down over months. My favorite kind. So they don't always go in order. It jumps around a lot, which I really appreciate.
When did they sit down together? Like late 90s, somewhere around there?
I don't know.
Well, he passed away in 2003, so probably was around Jerry Maguire era, probably mid 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, probably. I can probably
would make sense to me.
Yeah, let me look.
But I don't know how I've missed that book. I love Cameron Crowe, and I've read about. I know he really has deep affection for the work of Billy Wilder. So I would love to read that. Yeah, what a thrill it must have been for Crowe to sit with his idol and talk about his career. It must have been really cool.
And then there's Billy Wilder in Hollywood by Maurice Zolotov. It has this lovely yellow cover right here.
Ooh, I like the cover. And that's a biopic. Or I mean, I'm sorry, like a biography just about his time.
It's a biography with a foreword by Jack Lemmon.
Oh, cool. I said biopic. Like I would love to see a film made about Billy Wilder. Would be interesting. I don't know what the crux of the story would be.
Right. I would make it about early ones. I was in Vienna in 2018, and next to a restaurant is one of his childhood homes. So they had a plaque up for that, and that was really cool. And then we have Close Up on Sunset Boulevard by Sam Staggs.
Oh, I have that one.
You
Very
have
cool.
that one. Those are the three I grabbed immediately. I have a bunch more, but I already gave you too much information and research, which is not really my job as a guest and non-host, but I can't help myself as a journalist.
And I almost wrote a screenplay about I wrote a screenplay about Wes Craven's life, and I had a really great time with it. And I was almost about to do one about Gloria Swanson that was going to open with her in production on Sunset Boulevard, and it was kind of about her journey into trying to get this theatrical production off the ground in the 50s that never came to be. And then I did a lot of research. I just never wrote the thing. Maybe down the road I will. Yeah. But I just think this era of cinema is really fascinating, and the trajectory of Billy Wilder's career, I've always really admired, like what he would do with multiple genres and all of these things. And even those last few films didn't connect as well, like Avanti, I do think he's one of our most important film directors, and it was just a great thrill to talk about him finally today on Film of 50.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so that takes us to the end here, Marcus. Let our listeners know where they can find you online, and anything you'd like to promote. Talk about it now.
You can find me at marcusgorman.com, where you'll be able to see my various projects. I program for the Seattle International Film Festival. I'm a company member at Annex Theater. We are making a film of one of my plays right now that should come out sometime early next year. Okay. We wrapped on shooting that. I cover film and theater for The Ticket at the Seattle Times. So that's theticket.seattletimes.com. I volunteer at the Grand Illusion Cinema in Seattle. That's grandillusioncinema.org. And I will be programming for Make Believe Seattle 2023, a brand new genre festival. There's a bunch of other stuff I do. You can find out more on my website.
Wow, you're keeping busier right now than Billy Wilder was in 1957.
Oh no, I wish. I wish people would like. Yeah, this is a small movie, but like, hopefully, I can write a bigger movie, and that'll be really fun.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I want to do is write movies and plays. Honestly,
that's the dream.
Seems fun. Right? Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being here again, Marcus, and thanks all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.